Hey church family, how are you doing with this newest edition of Stay-at-Home California? More than one person I've talked to has told me that to them, it feels like being in prison. To which I've really been tempted to ask, how do you know? How is it that you're so familiar with what it feels like to be in prison? But I didn't know this person that well, so I didn't want to ask. But back to my question, how are you doing? Or more to the point, if, because of everything that's going on in our state, you feel like you are in prison, then let me ask you, are you a joyful prisoner? Those two words, joyful and prisoner, are two words that we don't typically think of as going together. And yet they are two words that would provide a perfect description of the Apostle Paul. Writing from a Roman prison cell, Paul penned these words. He wrote, "And I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I'm in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear." Sitting in a Roman prison, it'd be easy for the Apostle Paul to focus on all that he'd lost. Paul had lost the freedom to share the gospel. He'd lost the freedom to plant churches, and he'd lost the freedom to train up leaders in the different places that he longed to travel to. Nevertheless, he looked at where he was, and he looked at what was happening to him, and his response was joy. Why? Because everything that had happened to him hadn't slowed the advance of the gospel. It had actually helped it. Again, look at his words. He wrote, "Everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news." And Paul shared three ways that the gospel was advancing. First of all, he was able to share the gospel with the Roman soldiers who guarded him. The way things worked at that time was that Paul, as a Roman prisoner, would have had 3 different soldiers chained to him, each of them working an 8-hour shift, but 3 different soldiers every day, 24/7. When it came time to sharing the good news of what Christ had done with these soldiers, Paul, in effect, had a captive audience. So let me ask you, who do you think was really the prisoner? Paul or the soldier who was chained to him? A second reason that Paul could see the gospel advancing was that he was able to reach the Roman citizens who visited him. As a prisoner, Paul wasn't allowed to leave his place of confinement, but that didn't mean that others weren't allowed to visit him. They were, and they did, and Paul was able to encourage them and embolden them to reach out to others that Paul couldn't reach himself. And a third reason that Paul saw the gospel advancing was that the longest period of Paul's incarceration, 2 whole years, was also the greatest period of Paul's impact. In other words, Paul's confinement was God's assignment. He wrote the books of Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon from that Roman prison. That prison became his pulpit. Now maybe you feel chained to or imprisoned by something right now. Whether it's the restrictions that have been placed on you by this pandemic, or whether it's a job, or a relationship, or just a set of circumstances that you didn't sign up for. Have those things stolen your joy? They don't have to. You can still choose to be a happy prisoner. So the next time you feel shackled to some of life's circumstances, look at it as an opportunity to share the good news with others and point them toward the one who endured much worse than you and I are going through right now, all for us, so that we could have new life. Amen.